Now I know I'm almost 30 years late to the party, but Berserk is awesome. I went from not knowing what Berserk was a year ago to binging 3 movies, the entire manga, 25 episodes of the 1997 series, and getting not 1, not 2, but 3 tattoos, and I have loved every second of it. I went into Berserk expecting nothing more but a macho man demon-slaying adventure, and I got that. But I also got a deep and thought-provoking story of trauma, love, loss, and retaining one's humanity in the face of insurmountable odds. But now that all the visual media for Berserk is finished for me, it leaves only the interactive media. And you know what that means? Video games. I am so excited because recently I bought a lot off eBay that has every Berserk game ever made, and I'm ready to sit down, put my glasses on, and play some games. Yeah, that must be it right now. Alright, well, got the box right here, so I can't wait to dig in and see what we got. Three? There's only 3? Yeah, so evidently throughout all of time and space, there are only 3 official releases in the Berserk series for gaming. And they are the 1999 Dreamcast exclusive Sword of the Berserk Guts' Rage, 2004's Japan-only release Berserk Millennium Empire Arc, Chapter of the Holy Demon War on PS2, oof, that's a mouthful, and 2016's Berserk and the Band of the Hawk for the PS3, PS4, PS Vita, and PC. Keep in mind that for someone like me, my initiation into the world of anime and manga prior to this was Dragon Ball, which has like 70 games, so the lack of gaming options here was a massive surprise to me. Especially considering how Berserk is unanimously praised by people as the greatest manga of all time. I mean, I just assumed that it had dozens of games made, but that's just not the case. Oh well, I mean, it's a damn shame. I plan to play and review each of these 3 Berserk games, but for starters and for the sake of this video, we're going to play the most recent and most easily accessible one of them all, Berserk and the Band of the Hawk, released in 2017. Now, I'm skeptical, but let's see if this amazing story translates well to the world of gaming. Now, we gotta get one thing out of the way for starters. Band of the Hawk is not the kind of game you'd expect it to be. If you're expecting a level-based story with combat and gameplay like the OG God of War, you're going to have to look to the PS2 for that, because this game is most certainly not like that at all. Band of the Hawk is a Musou game, and if you're looking at me asking, Nikolai, what's a Musou game? Well, do you remember the Dynasty Warriors games on PS2? Or most recently, Hyrule Warriors? That's kind of the game that Band of the Hawk is. It's an open area beat 'em up, not a spectacle fighter, if that makes sense. The type of game that takes 0 to little brain power to play and to win. So I won't be able to give any of you the context of, is Band of the Hawk a good Musou game? But what I can tell you is if this video game is worth your time as a Berserk fan, which I believe is the most important thing of all. You have to think about this game in the sense of what it is versus what it should be, if that makes sense. I just don't want someone rushing out there to buy this decently pricey game, only to be disappointed 10 minutes in because it's not what they thought it would be. Anyway, now to the actual review. As stated before, this being a Musou game, what is the actual gameplay like? What will you be expected to do in this game? Simply put, you'll be hitting a lot of X during your playthrough and peppering in a little bit of the Y action as well. And honestly, that's about as complex as the gameplay gets. The combo list, as you can see here, is very complex. Ah, yes, I see. You got your basic light sword slashes, your heavy sword slashes, your gadgets like throwing knives, arm cannon, etc. This game doesn't have a lot of depth to it, and 99% of your playtime will be spent killing a certain number of enemies until mini-boss enemies hit the field, and then you win the level. While the combat is very shallow, I'm honestly surprised about how long this game kept me entertained while playing, despite how shallow the missions in the combat are. Seeing hundreds of enemies on screen and watching everyone go flying as you hit your special moves is an awesome feeling. And it really tracks with Guts' whole 100-man Slayer tag, which, fun fact, is also an achievement in this game. Nice touch. However, in this game, Guts is more like the Million-Man Slayer. There are 46 levels in total, and while Guts is most assuredly the individual you'll be playing with the most, and by most I mean your entire first playthrough, this is a Muso game. That means there are multiple playable characters to choose from in either free play or when you replay previously completed missions. Before you roll into combat, you'll be able to level up your gear that will give you status effects to your attack strength, defensive strength, overall vitality. You'll be able to buy throwable weapons, healing items, status buffs like increased damage or whatever. You know, it's all pretty simple. And while not very necessary for any part of the story mode's playthrough, this actually becomes essential to use if you want to complete the endless Eclipse mode. But more on that later on. In addition to the grounded hand-to-hand combat with the cannon fodder that is the opposition, sometimes you're given a horse. And wow, would you look at that, this game has horseback combat. And guess what? It fucking sucks. You basically have two speeds when on horseback, slow as ass or fast as shit. Classic two-gear diarrhea. You're either going full speed or you aren't moving at all with no in between. While I was on horse, I struggled to hit my targets with my sword swings. And honestly, when I played this game, I would immediately ditch my horse and just go running into combat on foot because it was that bad. However, it did get a few chuckles out of me to just run into people with the horse and watch bodies go flying.
Move, bitch, get out the way, get out the way, bitch, get out the way.
The more bodies you stack, the higher your rage meter builds, and when you get maxed out on that rage meter and activate it, you become a moving wood chipper. After that, your frenzy gauge will increase, and once that's full, you can unleash a devastating AoE move. I'd be lying if I said I didn't absolutely love every moment I was doing this shit. And when you watch a whole legion of soldiers get turned into red mist, hell yeah, that's fun to see. One thing I do think is pretty odd about this game is the lack of gore outside any of the special attacks. If anyone knows anything about Berserk, it's the sheer amount of gore on display when any fight kicks off. But in this game, there's barely any of that. Now, I'm not expecting Soldier of Fortune levels of detailed dismemberment for every single one of these enemies, but not having heads pop or bodies split in half every now and again, besides the aforementioned Berserk modes, or at all through any of the cutscenes, just feels weird, and not in line with the subject matter. I assume this is probably a budgetary reason, which I get, but I couldn't help but notice the lack of blood and carnage in each fight. It feels like if Berserk aired on Toonami back in the early 2000s, if that makes any sense. Now, you're going to be spreading a lot of bodies in this game. Tens of thousands by the time the end credits roll. So what about those enemies? What are you going to be fighting? Well, pretty much whatever Guts fights in the manga, that's what you're going to fight in this game. For the most part. A large majority of the enemies in this game are going to be dudes with spears, swords, and bows, generic demons or spirits, the same character model, copy and pasted a million times over. And while enemy variety is an issue, because none of these enemies attack you or force you to play in a different kind of way, the AI for them is way worse. The word brain dead doesn't even come close to describing the bulk of what you're going to be fighting against. Hundreds of enemies are pouring into the map every second, and yet there isn't a single brain cell to be shared amongst them. They stand around, wait for you, sometimes don't even attack, and when they actually do, they barely do any damage. There are stronger enemies that you will face in each level that can take more hits and dole out a bit more damage, but their AI isn't any better. The enemies in this game are complete buffoons, incapable of posing even the slightest challenge, and I never even used the block button until I ran into the bosses. And oh my god, the bosses. Usually in video games, bosses are a test for the player to hone their skills and demonstrate what they have learned and practiced in a challenging but fair way. Think about any Elden Ring boss battle, for example. Band of the Hawk does not subscribe to this mode of thinking at all. The bosses in the game are all damage sponges, and while the constant X, 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 Y can still be fun and engaging in combat versus normal enemies, it immediately becomes a drag when going against bosses. With combat being so shallow, a lot of the time there isn't much you can do to dish out damage on bosses or to avoid damage in general. Basically, every boss battle mission will go like this. Start the mission, sprint to the reach of the boss, and immediately start swinging your sword like a psychopath and hope they die before you do while popping your heals in between. There is no strategy to be had, no masterful swordplay, in-depth strategy, or knockdown drag-out fights that push you to the brink of insanity. None of that. And sometimes when you're hitting the boss, the game just decides, nah, that isn't doing damage, with no clear and obvious indication that you aren't hurting it. Thank God for the health bars, because without it, you'd have no idea that you were wasting your time or what attacks were doing damage and what wasn't. Something that also happened a lot to me in the boss battles is getting knocked into the fucking corner and being unable to move and just getting bitch slapped around for 2 minutes. Look at this. What the fuck am I supposed to do here? The absolute worst symptom of the horrible boss design is in the fight against Femto. AoE spam for days, boy. With a slowing movement status effect to boot, and constantly respawning enemies make this whole entire fight a disaster of getting knocked down, standing up, getting knocked down again with nothing you can do, so you just end up in a vicious cycle of getting bonked over and over, only to sneak in 1 or 2 hits before the cycle repeats anew. Also, when I fought against Femto in the final stages of Endless Eclipse, I had a weird glitch where none of the game's special effects loaded in. That includes the character's attacks, so I couldn't see any of the attacks that were hitting me. This was a disaster, but by the grace of God, I did it, and I finally unlocked the Beast of Darkness armor. Either way, it's such a shame that the boss battles are this game's biggest flaw, because watching Guts fight the Apostles in the manga was always a treat to behold, but they completely botched it in this game. I speak no hyperbole when I say that Berserk and Band of the Hawk has the worst boss battles I have ever encountered in all of my years as a gamer. Now, before I started playing this game, I knew 2 things that were unanimously criticized from fans and reviewers alike: the boss battles and the size of the playable roster. There are 8 characters to play as, which to me doesn't sound bad at all. But for comparison's sake, the previously mentioned Hyrule Warriors has 18 characters you can play as. But to be honest though, that's not really a big deal to me. I'm always of the mind quality over quantity, and while yes, it does suck that inevitably some fan favorite characters are going to miss the cut, I'd rather have fewer characters done really well versus a bunch of characters done the same. With that being said though, who are the hateful 8 that have been chosen? Guts, obviously, Casca, Judo, Nosferatu Zod, Serpico, Shirkei, and do you want to guess the final spot? Is it Pippin? Is it Salat? Farnese? Skull Knight? No. It's Wild. Wait a second. Wild? Are my notes right? Yeah, Wild. Probably the most hated character in all of Berserk, is one of the 8 characters you can play in this game. I mean, what? Look, I can argue the point to people all day long that Wild is not a bad character and he should be in Berserk. But when you're dealing with a severely limited roster spot for the game, I just have absolutely no idea or understanding of how Wild makes it in. We only have 3 Berserk games in existence and none of them let us play as Skull Knight. But this fucking game lets us play as a guy who's been effectively washed out of Berserk history. It's mind-blowing. Skull Knight, Farnese, Pippin, Salat, Isidro, they all have attacks and character models in the game too, which just makes it even more insulting. All of these characters do play differently, and it is fun to have the option every now and again to switch to another fighter, but make no mistake, this game, at least on your first playthrough, is the Guts show. And in my opinion, Guts is the most fun person to play as anyway, but being able to play as Zod is also pretty dope. Now while I can't agree with the final roster decision of having Wild in the game over Skull Knight or Farnese, one thing I can say is the models for all named characters and the Apostles look great. And overall, the graphics are solid. The in-game engine cutscenes look awesome, showing some great lighting, animations, emotion in the characters' faces, and when it sticks close to the manga, it gives you that warm and fuzzy feeling. But word to the wise, don't get too excited for them, because they are so few and far between. The cutscenes in this game are basically 3 types: in-game cutscenes, actual footage from the trilogy, and the stock standing around text boxes. And if there's one thing I hate in games, it is quote-unquote cutscenes that look like this. Also, there's no rhyme or reason as to what gets selected for an in-game engine cutscene and what doesn't. None of the Eclipse is done with the in-game engine cutscenes. They rely only on the movies for all of that. And other iconic scenes, like my personal favorite, the Bonfire of Dreams, this is what it's reduced to.
I don't want to die. For me, that is the only reason I keep fighting. There is nothing to save myself for or give myself to. I fight because I know nothing else. Once I was willing to do just that, to commit myself to fighting, and let anyone else find a reason for me.
Guts, you're not thinking of... Are you thinking of leaving the Hawks.
死にたくねえって理由だけでこいつを振り回すことしか知らねえってだけで俺は戦をやってきたんだ。そして何より一番肝心な戦うわけってやつを俺はいつも他人に預けようとしてたのかもしれねえ。
ガッツ、お前まさか高野団をやめるつもりじゃ。
What the hell is even that?
But through an ocean of awful cutscenes, we can catch glimpses of the Berserk game that we all want, replicating several moments from the manga that we all know and love. But you know what else is ugly? The environments that you'll be playing in. Woof! There are so many reused stages here, and you'll find yourself saying, wait, haven't I been here before? Also, some of the scaling in the environment is off. Is judo really small? Or is this table really big? The environments are pretty much all dog water, with a few small exceptions. The Eclipse level is probably the one I actually liked, but I think that was more so because it was the Eclipse, and not because of it actually being a good or engaging stage. As stated before, the character models for all named characters, specifically Guts, look great, so credit needs to be given. And when you hit that frenzy mode, and you see Guts' scalp cut across his face, or when you let the Beast of Darkness overtake you in the Berserker armor, these animations are fantastic. It looks better than the 2017 version, wouldn't you say? Jesus, I can't believe they just cut to a JPEG. Good God, that anime sucked. So, this game comes with mediocre gameplay, mixed bag of content, and really good character models that are lost in a sea of copy and paste locales. But what about the story? Because what is Berserk if not an amazing love story disguised in a dark medieval fantasy world? The most important question of this review, does this game do this story justice in its retelling? Nope. Before I explain what stumbling blocks the story has, what exactly are we going to be playing with? You'll begin with the Golden Age arc, then the Black Swordsman, then Conviction arc, and then end when Guts and company get on the boat and sail to Elfheim. Sounds pretty solid, right? I mean, it's certainly the longest and most comprehensive story of Berserk we've gotten in gaming, since both the Dreamcast and PlayStation 2 exclusives are original side stories for the most part. But wait a minute, aren't we missing something crucial? Something that was imperative to the collision course of Farnese, the Holy Sea Knights, and Guts? One chapter that is widely recognized as the best that Berserk has to offer? Ah, the renowned Lost Children chapter? Yeah, that one. Well, that's right, there is no Lost Children chapter. No mention, no acknowledgement, no nothing. In this game, the Lost Children chapter, similar to the god-awful 2016 Berserk, has been wiped out and just doesn't exist. That's bullshit. Not only because this is a highly popular chapter to begin with, but it leaves out a huge chunk of the story that is essential to Guts' character development, his reputation in the world of the story, and the introduction of the Iron Chain Knights, Serpico, Farnese, the Holy See, and more. And I know many of you are probably thinking it's because of the very intense subject matter that these chapters depict. Jesus, is this legal?
FBI, open up!
And that there's no chance that this chapter was going to be shown because of it. However, I have two counterpoints to that argument. One, with the random omissions or changes that this game already takes in other arcs, there's no reason that they could have done it here with that particular scene in question. And two, if it's because of the depiction of assault in this chapter, then why is Wild even in the game? This cutscene right here, I mean, we all know what's being depicted, unless we forget that we have actual movie footage of the Eclipse and what happens there, or why would the horse, you know, this one, be in the game?
And he gets his own fucking in-game cutscene?
I have a theory, and I know it'll sound so stupid, but I think it makes sense. I believe this whole chapter was cut from the game because of Rosine. Not because of what she is or her story or anything like that. I think it's because she can fly, and these developers didn't know how to program that. Think about it. No other enemy in this game, God Hand, Apostle, Spirit, humans, fight from the air. There isn't even a jump button in this game. And I just don't think this kind of game or these kind of developers were able to implement a boss battle that consists of an opponent who's an air-heavy attacker. I mean, for fuck's sake, they can't even do ground boss battle fights correctly. So what makes you think they could do one that flies around? The omission of a beloved and important chapter is frustrating, but the biggest problem with the story, in all honesty, is the retconning or changing of events, locations, details, etc. And while I know that probably most of this was done due to budgetary or timeline constraints, Berserk is a license that deserves extra respect and care. And while I do think that the people who made this game were big fans, either the time, money, or talent just wasn't there. Several characters are excluded from this game, like all of these, and details as far as scene locations are completely different. It may not seem like a big deal, and one's own personal annoyance will differ from person to person, but honestly, these detail changes absolutely drove me nuts. With this game being severely handicapped by this lack of money and talent, that impacts other elements of the story. By not being able to adequately adapt elements from the manga, Guts' personal journey is severely stunted. This game doesn't give us much insight into who he is as a character, his growth, his stumbles, especially his dynamic with the Beast of Darkness. It all just kind of falls flat in this game. I mean, the story, it is included, but like, only kinda. It's like Walmart's Great Value Berserk, most times. Long story short, while the story is long and comprehensive, and I say that with the largest air quotes around comprehensive that I can muster, it suffers from a bloated runtime that makes the whole experience way longer than it needs to be, and it doesn't do a very good job of retelling the story that we have all come to love. First off, 70% of the story mode is the Golden Age. And yes, look, I love the Golden Age too. It is a flawless arc, in my eyes, the unquestioned best arc of the series, but I have had enough of it, guys. I want literally any other arc. I know it sounds crazy, but I think both the Dreamcast and the PS2 games, the stories, were better than this. And this is supposed to be a canon storyline. Guys, somebody already did the work for you. Just copy this. Look. Just copy this. But now on to Endless Eclipse mode. What is it? Well, basically, it's an endurance survival mode that is broken up into 100 levels. The higher the level, the harder the fights. And honestly, this was the only time during playing Berserk Band of the Hawk where I felt challenged. I know, I'm as shocked as you are. Sometimes you have to kill all the enemies, sometimes you have to race to the end portal, you can also escort allies to unlock health or item pickups. Nothing too fancy, but level 100 is where the ultimate prize of this game lies, the previously mentioned Berserker armor. Honestly, had this armor not been in the game to unlock, I probably would have stopped playing long ago, but here we are, I got it. It wasn't worth it just to have to play through that fucking Femto boss battle again. You actually can unlock the Femto costume for Griffith, but to do that, you have to beat the Endless Eclipse with all characters, and not a fucking chance am I doing that. You know, come to think of it, there's really no point in even going on. It's not like there's some pot of gold at the end of this shit rainbow. So to keep playing, you'd have to be a total fucking idiot. Now that I've touched on everything that makes up Berserk Band of the Hawk, what are my final thoughts on it? Well, on the positive side, the combat is very simple, but it is fun. Seeing hundreds of soldiers get obliterated in front of you every time you swing your sword is awesome. The character models for Name the Characters and apostles, monsters are actually really great and true to the source material. In-game full motion cutscenes look amazing, and it really shows what the game could have been with a bigger budget. For all of its faults, it is the most comprehensive story that we have of Berserk in digital form, be it TV show, movie, or video game. Take that for what it's worth. There are 8 playable characters with alternate costumes. Over 90 minutes of film footage is in this game, and while they certainly use that as a crutch, it has to be commended that they didn't skimp on it. And lastly, Endless Eclipse is a fun endurance survival mode that is a big reward at the end for those of you determined to get it. On the negative side, the boss battles are the worst I've ever encountered in a video game. Enemy AI is completely brain dead, the main story suffers from bloated runtime, Environments are dull, lifeless, and often reused. Wild being a playable character, but Farnese and Skull Knight aren't. I don't even know where to begin with this one. Sterile cutscenes run rampant in the game. Once you're out of the golden age, the game no longer has a safety net of film footage to do the heavy lifting for story presentation, and it shows. There's no English dub. But the biggest flaw of all, this game is not faithful in its presentation of the Berserk story. Missing characters, inaccurate portrayal of events, no Lost Children arc. The PS2 and Dreamcast games had better stories, and those were original. So ultimately, I have to answer. Do I recommend Berserk Band of the Hawk? The answer is yes, but with a massive asterisk of only if it was on sale. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have fun playing this game, but to be honest, I think most of that had to do with me just getting into Berserk and this being one of the only Berserk games, not necessarily about it being a good game in general. If you get it on sale, I'd say pull the trigger, but otherwise, I'd pass. Thank you all for watching. Please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. The next video I will be doing, Guts' Rage on the Sega Dreamcast. Let's see if this one fares any better than Band of the Hawk.